pilot refuses to let black man sit up front. He leaves everyone speechless with his response. They say you never know a person's true colors until they're placed in a position of power. On Flight 279 from John F. Kennedy International Airport, a routine journey took a shocking turn when a respected black entrepreneur boarded first class only to be told by the pilot himself that he wasn't allowed to sit up front. The cabin fell silent, eyes darting between the outraged pilot and the poised passenger. Tension rippled through the aisles. Yet in the midst of blatant prejudice, this man delivered a response that shook everyone to their core. Little did they know, the flight's most dramatic turbulence was only just beginning. Andrew Thompson woke up before dawn, sipping a cup of Kenyan roast, while the Manhattan skyline gradually brightened outside his Brooklyn apartment. Today's plan: catch Westland Airways Flight 279 at JFK, then head straight to a high-stakes meeting in Los Angeles. As the founder of Beacon of Tomorrow, an organization dedicated to supporting minority-owned startups, Andrew was no stranger to travel. He was used to flying first class, but he wasn't prepared for the cold reception awaiting him this particular morning. Once at JFK, Andrew breezed through security, checked his ticket for seat 2A, and boarded the Boeing 777. First class was populated by the usual mix of corporate flyers, a few vacationing families, and one older couple decked in matching tracksuits. Andrew settled in, noting how Lucy, the attentive flight attendant, made sure everyone was comfortable. He barely paid attention when the pilot, Captain Ronald Barnes, introduced himself. But a hint of something unsettling flickered in Barnes's gaze. Minutes later, with the cabin doors closed, Andrew opened his journal to jot down final notes for his big meeting. Then the pilot approached with an odd request. "May I see your boarding pass, sir?" Andrew blinked in surprise. The gate agent had already scanned it. Still, he handed it over calmly. Captain Barnes scrutinized it, muttered 2A, Andrew Thompson, and returned it with no apology. Other passengers, caught off guard, watched in silence. Andrew brushed it off, reassuring himself it was likely a misunderstanding, yet the tension only grew. About an hour into the flight, Lucy served Andrew coffee and discreetly asked if he was all right, which heightened his suspicions. He soon had confirmation when Barnes made a second appearance, this time declaring he'd received a complaint about Andrew causing discomfort in first class. The pilot suggested, rather forcefully, that Andrew move to the rear cabin. Taken aback, Andrew explained he'd done nothing wrong. Nearby passengers defended him, noting he'd barely spoken since boarding. Nonetheless, the pilot insisted Andrew was out of place and threatened to divert the flight if he refused to move. When Andrew stood to talk privately with the pilot in the galley, Lucy followed, worried. There, Captain Barnes dropped all pretense. Glancing at Andrew's expensive suit as though it were contraband, he said, "You might have the money for first class, but that doesn't mean you belong here." Andrew felt anger flare, but he kept his composure. He firmly stated he had every right to remain in his seat and would not be intimidated by baseless accusations. Lucy, horrified at Barnes's behavior, tried to defend Andrew but was shut down by the pilot's glare. Barnes's hostility only escalated. He spoke in low, threatening tones. "I can remove you from this plane or land early if I deem you a disturbance." Andrew answered with calm defiance, warning the pilot of the legal consequences of such an action. Ultimately, Barnes stormed back to the cockpit, leaving Andrew and Lucy unsettled. Other first-class passengers, sensing the injustice, offered Andrew sympathetic glances. Lucy urged him to stay vigilant, revealing she'd contact an airline supervisor on board for help. Returning to his seat, Andrew felt every eye in first class on him. The quiet hum of the aircraft was charged with indignation and disbelief. Even as he tried to refocus on his upcoming meeting, Andrew couldn't help but think, How could something this blatantly discriminatory happen in 2025? Yet he suspected the worst was not over. The pilot had the final word in the sky, and Andrew braced for whatever might come next. The meal service began, and Andrew forced himself to pick at the scrambled eggs and turkey bacon. He usually liked to eat healthy, but his appetite waned under the weight of what had just transpired. He decided to distract himself by reviewing presentation slides on his tablet, reaffirming the talking points for his pitch to Robert Greene. However, the calm was short-lived. About 2 hours into the flight, Captain Barnes's voice crackled over the PAR system. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've got some bumpy air ahead, so I'm switching on the fasten seatbelt sign. Please remain in your seats." Andrew felt the aircraft shudder as it hit mild turbulence, but it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. He'd flown countless times and had grown accustomed to the occasional bumps. He took a measured breath and returned to his slides, reminding himself not to dwell on the negativity. Just as he settled, Captain Barnes suddenly appeared at Andrew's side once again. This time the pilot's expression was less guarded, more confrontational. "Mr. Thompson," he began loudly, "I've had a complaint." Andrew blinked. "A complaint?" "Yes," Barnes continued, his voice carrying enough volume that several nearby passengers could hear. "We have limited availability in first class, and you're reportedly making some of the other passengers uncomfortable." Andrew's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Uncomfortable how?" Barnes sniffed, crossing his arms. "Word is you've been moving around, speaking too loudly. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable if we found you a different seat, possibly in the rear cabin." Stunned silence enveloped the first-class section. Andrew glanced at the other passengers. No one looked particularly uncomfortable, aside from the shock now registering on their faces at the pilot's accusation. The woman in the tracksuit across the aisle spoke up, her voice trembling with indignation. "He has not said a word to any of us," she declared. "He's been reading the entire time." Barnes shot her a withering look. "Ma'am, I'm asking Mr. Thompson, not you." Lucy, the flight attendant, hovered in the background, wringing her hands. She looked as though she might interject, but Barnes shut her down with a single glare. Andrew closed his tablet, letting the weight of the situation settle in. A swirl of emotions churned in his chest: anger, frustration, disappointment, but he fought to keep his composure. "Captain," Andrew said, his voice measured, "I've been seated here the whole time. I haven't disturbed anyone. If anyone felt uncomfortable enough to complain, I'd like to know the details." Barnes gave a tight-lipped smile. "Don't test me, sir. I'm responsible for the safety and comfort of everyone on board. I'm simply suggesting you relocate to ensure all passengers have the best experience possible." At this, a burly man in a business suit at 2C spoke up. "Captain, this is ridiculous. He hasn't bothered anybody. Why are you singling him out?" The pilot's cheeks reddened, as if he hadn't expected pushback. "It's none of your concern," he snapped. "I have every right to manage the cabin as I see fit." Andrew took a deep breath, eyeing the flight attendant Lucy, who looked devastated. He stood up slowly, his posture erect and dignified. "Captain Barnes," he said, "if this is truly about comfort, then perhaps it's best we handle this quietly, without disturbing the entire cabin." Barnes seemed to waver slightly, but squared his shoulders. "Fine, follow me." Andrew nodded. He turned to the other passengers who were visibly upset on his behalf, offering them a courteous smile. Then he stepped into the aisle, following the pilot toward the galley area near the cockpit. Lucy, anxious and uncertain, trailed behind them. Once they were out of earshot from most passengers, Captain Barnes turned to Andrew, his face flushing with annoyance or something deeper. The cramped galley was filled with trays and food carts, but Lucy positioned herself discreetly against one wall, a silent witness to what was about to unfold. "Look," Barnes began, lowering his voice only slightly, "I don't want any trouble, But this is my aircraft, and when I see something out of place, I address it. Andrew folded his arms. Something out of place? Barnes's eyes flicked over Andrew's expensive suit, his well-groomed appearance, and returned to his eyes with a look that carried years of bias. You heard me. You might have the money for a seat up front, but that doesn't mean you belong here. Lucy gasped softly. Andrew felt a wave of heat flood his body. Captain, he said softly, controlling his anger, you're crossing the line. I'm a paying customer, and you have no grounds to move me anywhere. I have every ground, Barnes said, his voice shaking with suppressed hostility. I've flown for 30 years. I know trouble when I see it, and frankly, I don't trust you not to cause a disturbance. Andrew's jaw clenched. Is that so? Enough, Barnes retorted, glancing at Lucy as if daring her to object. He took a step closer, bringing with him the smell of aftershave and simmering indignation. I don't want to see you in that seat again. I'm ordering you to move to economy class for the duration of this flight, or I will have to divert and remove you from this plane altogether. The outrageousness of the threat took Andrew's breath away. Lucy's eyes darted from Andrew to the captain, tears of frustration and disbelief shimmering. Captain, she interjected bravely, Mr. Thompson hasn't done anything. I've been monitoring the cabin. There are no complaints from any passenger. If there's an issue, it's not on his side. Barnes whirled on her. Watch your tone, Flight Attendant Mitchell. You're here to serve drinks and ensure passenger safety, not to second-guess your commanding officer. Lucy shrank back, and Andrew could see the tears she fought to keep at bay. He exhaled slowly, willing himself to remain calm. This was it, the moment of truth. He could yield to Barnes's threat, move to economy class, and endure a humiliating flight. Or he could stand his ground. He chose the latter. Captain Barnes, Andrew said, his voice resolute, if you're going to divert this plane over an invented complaint, you'll have to face the consequences. I guarantee you, Westland Airways will not look kindly on a pilot who acts on prejudice instead of facts. Barnes looked momentarily rattled. You think you can threaten me? You don't know who you're dealing with. Andrew was done mincing words. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A man who's letting personal bias override his professional duty. The pilot's eyes flashed. That's enough, he snapped to Lucy. You tell him we're out of seats in economy. I don't care if we have to shuffle people around. Do it now or we're diverting. Lucy glanced helplessly at Andrew. Before she could speak, Andrew raised a hand. Captain, the first strongly advise against this course of action. You'll be opening yourself and the airline to a lawsuit if you force me to move without any cause. Barnes snorted. Suit yourself. Let's see how your lawsuit holds up when we land. I'm the captain, and my word is law in the sky. Andrew stared at him, refusing to back down. The silence stretched to a breaking point, thick with tension. Finally, the pilot turned sharply and stormed off toward the cockpit, muttering curses under his breath. Lucy let out a shaky exhale. Mr. Thompson, I'm so sorry. He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. None of this is your fault. I appreciate you standing up for me. She nodded, tears threatening to spill. I have to get back to my station, but please just... Be careful. He's in a mood. I don't know what he might do. Andrew nodded, letting Lucy return to the main cabin. As he followed her, he felt the weight of 100 eyes on him. Passengers in both first and economy class craned their necks to see what was happening. Some wore expressions of sympathy. Others looked puzzled or concerned. Returning to his seat in first class, Andrew felt a swirl of emotions: anger, hurt, resolve. He strapped in, ignoring the stares, and resumed reviewing his slides, though he couldn't focus. Through the slightly parted curtains at the front of the cabin, he could see the cockpit door firmly shut, as though it were a barrier to communication, reason, and decency. He had no idea that the worst was still ahead and that the very real trials he would soon face would test not only his patience but also his core beliefs about justice and dignity. The plane soared across the country, the flight path taking them over rolling plains and patches of desert. Andrew glanced at the flight progress map on the screen before him. They were still about 3 hours out from Los Angeles. The tension in the cabin, however, felt as thick as a storm cloud. Every so often, Andrew noticed Lucy or another flight attendant whispering to passengers in hushed tones. They likely shared the bizarre confrontation that had just unfolded. Some of the passengers in first class flashed Andrew supportive nods or discreet thumbs-ups. Their solidarity heartened him, but it also magnified the sense of injustice he felt. After a fitful few minutes, Andrew stood up to stretch his legs, mindful that the seatbelt sign was off. He stepped into the aisle, heading toward the rear of the first-class section. The moment he drew aside the dividing curtain, he nearly collided with a furious Captain Barnes. "Where do you think you're going?" the pilot hissed, glancing nervously over his shoulder as if he didn't want the entire cabin to witness their exchange. Andrew's posture was unyielding. "I'm stretching my legs, Captain, which is within my rights as a passenger." Barnes took a step forward, his voice low. "Don't push me." Andrew measured his next words. "I'm not pushing you, Captain. But you're clearly overstepping your authority." The pilot opened his mouth for a retort, but at that moment, the plane lurched violently, sending both men stumbling. A beverage cart near the galley rattled precariously, cups and utensils clinking. The overhead speakers chimed, and the seatbelt sign illuminated as the plane hit a patch of rough turbulence. Barnes grabbed a handhold, cursing under his breath. "Great! Just what I need." He shot Andrew a glare as if the turbulence was somehow his fault, then hurried back to the cockpit. Andrew steadied himself against the wall and returned to his seat. The jolt of adrenaline from the turbulence, combined with the pilot's hostility, left him uneasy. As he buckled up, Lucy appeared at his side once again, trying to maintain her professional composure despite the shaking cabin. "We've got a bad patch of turbulence," she said, speaking louder to be heard above the rattling plane. "Captain says everyone should remain seated." Andrew nodded. "Thank you, Lucy." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "He's not letting this go. The co-pilot mentioned something about an unscheduled landing if this continues. Please just stay calm." Andrew pursed his lips. A forced landing over an invented issue would be not only outrageous, but also a huge inconvenience for everyone on board. Did the pilot truly intend to punish him at the expense of the other passengers? He glanced around first class. The woman in the tracksuit was gripping her armrest, eyes closed, while her husband held her hand. The business-suited man who had spoken up earlier shot Andrew a sympathetic look. It was evident that everyone was on edge, whether from the turbulence or the unresolved conflict. Then the plane dipped sharply, triggering gasps and a few panicked cries. Andrew's stomach flipped. He tried to breathe steadily, reminding himself that modern planes are built to withstand far worse. He couldn't help but wonder, though, if the pilot's agitation might be impairing his judgment. The chimes rang again, and Captain Barnes's voice came over the speakers. "Folks, this is the captain. We're encountering significant headwinds, and I'm requesting that flight attendants remain seated until further notice. We apologize for the inconvenience." The turbulence persisted for a good 20 minutes, each dip or bump fraying passengers' nerves. Andrew clasped his hands together, searching for calm. He thought of the reason for his journey, the potential partnership with Robert Greene, the expansion of Beacon of Tomorrow. So much was at stake. Eventually, the turbulence eased, and the seatbelt sign flicked off. Lucy took the opportunity to rush to Andrew's side. "Mr. Thompson, are you all right?" she asked, her voice nearly drowned out by the hum of the engines and the hushed murmurs of anxious passengers. Andrew nodded. "I'm fine." She leaned in and whispered, The co-pilot told me the captain is insisting on having you removed if we land somewhere early. I've already radioed our ground staff about the situation. This isn't protocol at all. Andrew sighed, weighed down by the insanity of it all. I just want to get to Los Angeles. I have a meeting I can't afford to miss. Lucy bit her lip. Understood. I'll do everything I can to help you. There's also a supervisor traveling in economy class, Mr. Jenkins, from Westland Airways Corporate. He's not in uniform, but he's on the flight. I might be able to get his attention without letting the captain know. Andrew's eyes widened with a flicker of hope. If an airline supervisor was on board and witnessed the pilot's conduct, that could change everything. That sounds like a good idea, he said. But be careful. She nodded. I will. Then she hurried off, pushing the beverage cart as a guise to slip into economy class. While she was gone, Andrew tried to distract himself by returning to his notes, but his concentration was shattered. The confrontation replayed in his head on loop, each new recollection stoking an undercurrent of anger. He forced himself to breathe slowly, reminding himself that anger would not solve this. 15 minutes later, Lucy reappeared. A tall, bespectacled man in his 40s following discreetly behind. He wore khakis and a polo shirt, quite unlike a typical airline uniform. Lucy gestured to Andrew. "Mr. Thompson, this is Mr. Jenkins," she said quietly. "He's an internal supervisor for Westland Airways." Jenkins reached out to shake Andrew's hand, a furrow of concern creasing his brow. "I've just been briefed on the situation. I apologize for this fiasco. I'll do my best to resolve it." Andrew gave a polite nod, relief and wariness battling inside him. "Thank you for stepping in." Jenkins cast a glance toward the cockpit. "We can't let the pilot see me speaking with you at length. I'm going to radio corporate to let them know what's happening. If the captain tries to divert, they'll be aware of the circumstances." Andrew released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I appreciate that." Jenkins nodded. "Hang tight. Once we're on the ground, we'll sort this out properly." With that, Jenkins slipped back into the economy cabin, trying to remain inconspicuous. Lucy gave Andrew a reassuring pat on the shoulder before returning to her duties. For the next half hour, Andrew braced for the next move from Captain Barnes. But the pilot did not emerge from the cockpit. Occasionally, the plane would shudder with mild turbulence, and the seatbelt sign would flick on. Andrew suspected the pilot might be using the turbulence as a pretext to keep everyone seated. As they flew westward, the sunlight in the cabin shifted, and Andrew's watch showed they were past the halfway point. Despite everything, Andrew felt a glimmer of hope that maybe the rest of the flight would pass without another explosive confrontation. Just when Andrew thought the situation had reached a plateau of uneasy truce, Captain Barnes's voice boomed again over the PAR system. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain speaking. Due to a passenger disturbance, I will be making an unscheduled landing in Denver to resolve the issue. Please remain seated and follow all instructions from the cabin crew." An uproar rippled through the first-class cabin. Gasps, exclamations, and murmurs of disbelief buzzed among the passengers. Andrew felt his pulse quicken. Had the pilot lost his mind? Diverting a flight was no small thing, especially over something as trivial and fabricated as a passenger disturbance. Lucy rushed to Andrew, her face pale. "He's serious. We're rerouting to Denver International. I've never seen anything like this." Andrew steadied himself. "If we land in Denver, what happens?" She shook her head, her voice trembling. Normally, in a legitimate disturbance, the passenger would be escorted off by airport security. But in this case, you've done nothing. At that moment, Jenkins hurried up the aisle, an urgent look on his face. He spoke quickly, mindful of prying ears. "I just got off the phone with corporate. They're aware of the situation and have ordered Captain Barnes not to divert unless there's a genuine emergency." Andrew's heart soared for a moment. "So, are they contacting him directly?" Jenkins nodded. They've tried. He won't respond to their hails. He's ignoring them. A ripple of dread coursed through Andrew. So, we're really landing in Denver? I'm afraid so, Jenkins confirmed. But I need you to stay calm. The airline's legal team is already on standby. Let him do what he's going to do. We'll address everything once we're on the ground. Andrew closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. This was unreal, like a nightmare come to life. All he had done was take his rightful seat. Now, he might be facing public humiliation, a missed business deal, and who knew what else. The plane banked sharply as it changed course. Some passengers groaned in frustration, while others peppered the flight attendants with questions. From his seat, Andrew heard a cacophony of voices. "This is ridiculous. What passenger disturbance? Are we going to miss our connecting flights?" The flight attendants did their best to placate everyone, but the tension was combustible. Eventually, Lucy made her way to Andrew again. "The captain wants to speak to you in the galley," she whispered. "Mr. Jenkins is on his way there too." Andrew unbuckled and stood, ignoring the stares from other first-class passengers. He squared his shoulders and walked to the galley with as much dignity as he could muster, feeling as though he was heading into a lion's den. When he arrived, Captain Barnes was already there, arms folded. Jenkins stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, trying to remain cordial but clearly outraged. Lucy hovered anxiously nearby. "What's this about, Captain?" Andrew asked, his voice calm. Barnes leveled a piercing stare. "I'm making a landing in Denver, and you will disembark. This flight doesn't continue with you on board." Jenkins cleared his throat. "Captain, I'm an internal supervisor for Westland Airways. The corporate office has instructed me to inform you that there is no valid reason for this diversion. You are ordered to proceed to LAX." Barnes's nostrils flared. "I don't take orders from you. My decision is final. We have a security concern." Jenkins's voice rose. "What security concern, mister? Thompson has done nothing wrong, and there's no evidence to suggest any threat. You're risking the airline's reputation, not to mention financial and legal consequences." Barnes barked a bitter laugh. "Don't lecture me. I have the final say, full authority. We're landing in Denver. If corporate doesn't like it, they can fire me. But I'll have done my duty." Andrew shook his head, exasperated. "Captain, you're fabricating this entire scenario. Is it because I'm black and you don't think I belong in first class? Just say it. Stop hiding behind fake excuses." The pilot's lips curled into a sneer. He looked as if he might deny it, but the hate in his eyes was too transparent. "Watch your mouth," he growled. "I don't have to justify my decisions to the likes of you." Jenkins stepped between them. "We're done here. I'm instructing the flight attendants to remain calm and keep passengers informed. If you land in Denver, you will answer directly to corporate. If you continue to LAX, we can handle this internally. Make your choice, Captain." For a moment, it seemed Barnes might relent. His eyes flicked to Lucy, who averted her gaze. He looked at Jenkins, fists tightening at his sides. Then, with a stiff nod, he said, "I'm the captain. I choose what's best for this flight. We will continue to Denver." He stormed off, pushing past Jenkins and Andrew, and disappeared into the cockpit. Jenkins let out a string of curses under his breath. Lucy stood by, tears glistening. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, looking directly at Andrew. "I can't believe this is happening." Andrew exhaled a shaky breath. "I can't either, but I'll handle whatever comes next." Jenkins laid a hand on Andrew's shoulder. "I'll do everything in my power to see that justice is served, Mr. Thompson. Trust me on that." Andrew gave a short nod. The plane had already begun its descent. The frenetic motions of the flight attendants indicated they were preparing for an unscheduled landing. Lucy quickly pulled Andrew aside. "You should return to your seat and remain there," she said. Security might come on board once we land. Stay calm, no matter what they do. We have witnesses, we have Jenkins, we have the truth on our side. Thank you, Andrew managed, forcing a weak smile. He made his way back to seat 2A, ignoring the wide-eyed stares of the other passengers. The swirling mix of anger, fear, and disbelief in his stomach felt like a lead weight. He locked eyes with the supportive business traveller in 2C, who just shook his head in disbelief. Another patch of turbulence rattled the plane, as though the aircraft itself was protesting the injustice. Andrew clutched the armrest, heart pounding, steeling himself for the spectacle that was about to unfold on the tarmac in Denver. Some part of him wondered if the hardest lesson here was to maintain his composure in the face of blatant discrimination, a lesson he'd learned many times before but had hoped never to endure again. Little did he know, the fates had a twist in store, one that would transform a moment of injustice into a defining stand for truth and dignity. The flight entered its final approach into Denver. From his window, Andrew could see the sprawling cityscape and the vast runway strips of Denver International Airport. Anxiety knotted in his chest. Who would greet them on the ground? Airport security? Airline officials? The local news, perhaps, if the pilot had truly escalated this to a full-blown incident? As the Boeing 777 lowered and the landing gear locked into place, Andrew felt the tension in the cabin spike. People whispered in hushed tones. The stench of fear and confusion tainted the otherwise controlled environment. Suddenly, the plane shuddered violently. A groan tore through the fuselage, something mechanical, metal scraping against metal. Andrew's heart lurched, adrenaline surging. The cabin lights flickered for a split second, and several passengers yelped. Captain Barnes's voice boomed over the PAR system, tense and urgent. "This is the captain. We're experiencing a hydraulic issue with the landing gear. Flight attendants, prepare for a potential emergency landing." The words hung in the air like an ominous cloud. Andrew's eyes darted to Lucy, who rushed to secure trays and instruct passengers to brace. Oxygen masks dropped from the overhead compartments, but weren't yet deployed for use. A collective gasp and murmur swept through the cabin. Andrew strapped himself in, checking that his seatbelt was secure. The entire plane rattled, and he heard an unsettling whine from below the floorboards. The pilot's earlier hostility was momentarily overshadowed by a much more pressing crisis: the safety of over 200 people. The approach grew more erratic, the plane rocking from side to side. Through the window, Andrew saw the runway lights rushing up to meet them. The tension in the cabin was suffocating. Then the wheels slammed onto the tarmac with a violent jolt, sending passengers lurching forward. A screech of tires, a burst of sparks. The plane jerked harshly to the left, as if the landing gear couldn't support the aircraft's full weight. Passengers screamed, overhead bins popped open, and bags tumbled out. For a terrifying moment, Andrew thought the plane might skid off the runway. But somehow, the pilot managed to keep the aircraft in a semblance of control. They careened down the runway, trailing sparks on one side. Emergency vehicles raced alongside, lights flashing in the twilight. After what felt like an eternity, the plane finally screeched to a halt. Smoke billowed from the landing gear. "Everyone remains seated," Lucy shouted, voice trembling but professional. The cabin erupted in a cacophony of fear and relief, some people sobbing, others praying, still others shouting instructions or curses. Andrew gripped his armrests, heart thundering. He'd been through some turbulence in his life, literal and metaphorical, but nothing quite like this. Over the PAR, Captain Barnes spoke again, panting, "Folks, this is the captain. We've made an emergency landing. Remain calm. Emergency crews will assist us shortly." A wave of applause and cheering erupted, not for the pilot's earlier behavior, but out of sheer relief that they were still alive. Lucy and the other attendants hurried to assess any injuries. The oxygen masks dangled overhead, some partially pulled out of their compartments. Once the immediate danger passed, the passengers in first class exchanged stunned looks. Andrew caught the eye of the business traveler in 2C, who let out a shaky laugh. "If the pilot still wants to remove you, he'll have to do it in a wheelchair if this plane can't move." Andrew couldn't muster a smile. His mind reeled from the abrupt shift from personal injustice to life-threatening emergency. He unbuckled his seatbelt only when Lucy signaled it was safe and rose slowly to help some of the elderly passengers collect their bags and secure their masks. Outside, the swirl of red and blue lights indicated fire trucks and ambulances were converging on the runway. The pungent smell of burnt rubber permeated the air, seeping through vents. Within minutes, the aircraft doors opened and firefighters and EMTs rushed in, checking for injuries. Amid the chaos, Andrew saw Captain Barnes stepping out of the cockpit, sweaty and visibly shaken. For the first time, Andrew felt a pang of empathy. Landing a massive plane with a hydraulic failure was no small feat. But that empathy warred with the memory of the pilot's blatant discrimination just moments before this crisis. Their eyes met across the chaos in the aisle. Andrew couldn't read Barnes's expression. Was it anger, relief, or regret? The man's face was pale, and he seemed to avoid Andrew's gaze as he moved past him, presumably to speak with the emergency responders. Lucy approached Andrew with wide eyes. "Mr. Thompson, are you okay?" He nodded, exhaling. "I'm fine." She looked shaken. "We're evacuating onto the tarmac. We need to follow standard procedure. Please take only your essential items." Andrew grabbed his tablet and phone, leaving his carry-on behind in the overhead bin. He followed the line of passengers down the aisle. The adrenaline spike left him trembling, but he kept his steps steady and his demeanor calm. Once outside, the late afternoon sun of Denver greeted them alongside a chilly breeze. Emergency personnel guided passengers to a safe distance from the plane. The Boeing 777-777's left landing gear was heavily damaged, smoke still curling upward. Firefighters hosed down parts of the undercarriage to ensure nothing ignited. On the tarmac, Andrew joined a cluster of first-class passengers who milled about, trying to make sense of it all. Lucy busied herself helping a frantic mother calm her crying child. Jenkins, the internal supervisor, stood nearby, speaking urgently into his cell phone. Eventually, paramedics ushered Andrew and the other passengers toward a shuttle bus that would ferry them to the terminal. Andrew noticed Captain Barnes standing off to the side, also on his phone. He seemed to be in a heated conversation, likely with Westland Airways officials. Stepping onto the bus, Andrew found an empty seat and collapsed into it. The swirl of activity outside the window felt surreal: fire engines, paramedics, the battered airplane that had just carried them across the skies. He closed his eyes, searching for a moment of silence within himself. He had survived a horrifying emergency landing, but the crisis with Captain Barnes was far from over. Would the pilot still try to have him removed or arrested, or would the airline step in and rectify this travesty once and for all? The bus rumbled away from the plane, carrying dozens of shaken passengers to the terminal. Andrew braced himself, suspecting that the real confrontation was only beginning. The shuttle bus pulled up to a secure entrance at Denver International Airport. Uniformed airport personnel and Westland Airways representatives waited in a roped-off area, ready to process and assist the disheveled passengers. Although relief from the safe landing washed over them, confusion remained about what would happen next. Passengers were guided into a makeshift processing area, really just a large conference room near the gates where they could sit, receive water and snacks, and speak with airline staff or medical personnel. Andrew found a seat near Jenkins, the internal supervisor, who was still on the phone, evidently relaying updates to corporate. Eventually, Jenkins wrapped up his call and turned to Andrew. "I've spoken to the higher-ups," he said, voice tinged with exhaustion. "They want statements from the flight crew and passengers about the pilot's behavior. It's likely they'll ground Captain Barnes until further notice." Andrew rubbed a hand over his face. "What about me? He was insisting I'd be removed from the flight for causing a disturbance." Jenkins sighed. No one's buying his story anymore, especially after the meltdown he had about diverting the plane. The only reason he's not in immediate custody is because of the emergency landing. They're giving him the benefit of the doubt that maybe he panicked because of the mechanical failure. Andrew's gaze flicked around the room, noticing that Lucy was busy handing out blankets to a few passengers who looked particularly shaken. "So where is he now?" Jenkins jerked a thumb toward a hallway. "He's in a debriefing with airport authorities and Westland Airways on-site manager. The co-pilot is in there too, providing his account of what happened." Andrew's heart panged with gratitude for the co-pilot, Lucy, and all who'd stood up for him. He glanced down at his phone, which was buzzing with notifications, missed calls, text messages, and emails from people expecting him in Los Angeles. The most recent text was from Robert Green himself. "Heard about your flight ordeal. Are you all right?" Andrew tapped a quick reply, "Safe, but stuck in Denver for now. Will call soon." Setting the phone down, Andrew noticed Lucy approaching, her face brightening slightly when she saw him. She held out a bottle of water. "You look like you could use this," she said softly. He accepted the water gratefully. "Thank you, Lucy, and thank you for everything you did on that flight." She gave a tentative smile. "I only did what was right." "I can't stand by and let someone be treated unfairly, especially in such a blatant way." Andrew studied her face. She was young, probably in her mid-20s, yet she'd shown remarkable courage. "Have they asked you for a statement yet?" She nodded. "Yes. I told them exactly what happened, that Captain Barnes singled you out with no cause, threatened to divert the plane, and then actually did it against corporate orders." Jenkins chimed in. "Your testimony will be crucial, Lucy. Corporate takes these matters seriously, especially if it's proven to be racially motivated." A flicker of relief crossed her features. "I hope so. I don't want to see him harm anyone else like that." At that moment, a uniformed man with a Westland Airways badge approached their small group. "Mr. Thompson, Miss Mitchell, Mr. Jenkins, could you please follow me? We need you for a formal statement." They rose and followed the representative to a private office-like area. Andrew's pulse quickened as he braced himself to recount the entire ordeal. Inside, a stern-looking woman in a corporate suit sat behind a table, a notepad in front of her. She introduced herself as Amanda Birch, an aviation investigator for the airline. "Let's get started," Birch said, gesturing for them to sit. "I have audio recording on. Please state your names and roles." They did so, in turn. Once formalities were out of the way, Birch fixed her gaze on Andrew. "Mr. Thompson, can you describe the events leading up to the diversion and emergency landing from your perspective?" Andrew inhaled slowly, then spoke methodically, ensuring every detail was captured. He recounted the pilot's suspicious behavior from the start, asking for his boarding pass despite it being scanned, accusing him of making others uncomfortable, demanding he move to economy class, the confrontation in the galley, and the final decision to divert the flight to Denver. Lucy corroborated Andrew's statements, adding details from her vantage point in the cabin. Jenkins explained his role as a supervisor and how Captain Barnes had ignored corporate's direct orders not to divert. Birch took copious notes. When they finished, she leaned back in her chair, brows knitted. "Thank you for your honesty. We've also taken statements from some of the other passengers, and they align with yours. I can't comment on the final outcome, but it's clear Captain Barnes disregarded both standard protocol and direct instructions from corporate." Andrew nodded. "Thank you for your time. I know you'll do what's right." Birch offered a curt nod. "We will. For now, you're all free to go." Westland Airways will provide accommodations for anyone who needs to stay overnight in Denver. We'll also offer rebookings to Los Angeles. Mr. Thompson, we understand you have a business commitment there. We'll get you on the next available flight, if you wish. Andrew felt a rush of relief mingled with residual anger. Yes, I need to be in LAA's soon as possible. Consider it done, Birch said. Please wait in the lounge area, and we'll have the details sorted out for you shortly. They left the office, shoulders sagging in collective exhaustion. Jenkins departed to arrange accommodations for passengers. Lucy had to sign off her shift as she was part of the diverted crew. That left Andrew to navigate the swirl of anxious travelers, media inquiries, and airport announcements. At least half a dozen reporters or bystanders asked him for comments. Having heard rumors of a racially charged incident, Andrew politely declined, not wanting to jeopardize the official investigation. Eventually, Birch returned with good news. We have a flight leaving for LAX in 3 hours. You'll be in first class, of course, free of charge. We've also arranged a private waiting area for you, away from the press. Would you like that? Andrew considered it. Part of him wanted to stand publicly to condemn discrimination, but he knew he needed to handle it strategically. Thank you, Miss Birch. I'd appreciate some privacy until the flight. She nodded and led him down a hallway to a small VIP lounge. Inside, there was a sofa, a TV, and a refreshment station. Andrew collapsed onto the sofa, pulling out his phone to update Robert Greene. He typed quickly, "Emergency diversion. Will reach LA later tonight. Let's reschedule meeting for tomorrow if possible." Within minutes, Greene replied, "Absolutely. Glad you're safe. Call me when you land." Andrew exhaled, feeling the tension in his shoulders begin to loosen. The pilot's actions had been a nightmarish ordeal, but he'd at least survived an emergency landing and had the airline's support now. Hours passed in a blur. Eventually, he boarded a new flight with a different crew. This time, the boarding process was smooth, and the pilot personally welcomed him on board with a respectful smile, a stark contrast to the hostility he'd faced before. As the plane took off for Los Angeles, Andrew felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Still, the question lingered, what would happen to Captain Barnes? And more importantly, how could Andrew turn this personal tragedy into a catalyst for broader awareness and change? It was nearly midnight when Andrew stepped off the plane at Los Angeles International Airport. Westland Airways staff met him at the gate, whisking him away from curious onlookers and the few reporters still lurking around. They helped him collect his baggage, which had been rerouted as well, and then ushered him into a private car bound for his hotel. Throughout the car ride, Andrew stared at the flickering city lights of Los Angeles. He thought of the deal with Robert Greene, the reason he'd come here. More pressing, though, was the swirl of social media chatter that had erupted since the emergency diversion. News outlets were picking up the story, speculating on the pilot's alleged prejudice. Andrew's phone buzzed incessantly, with messages of support from colleagues, friends, and even strangers who had caught wind of the incident. When he arrived at the hotel, a well-appointed Westland Airways suite awaited him. He was too drained to do anything but collapse into bed, letting sleep claim him. The next morning, Andrew woke early to find a stack of newspapers outside his room. One headline read, "Emergency diversion, pilot's bias or mechanical failure." Another stated, "Passenger alleges racial discrimination on Westland Airways flight." He groaned, running a hand through his hair. Part of him loathed being thrust into the public eye like this, but he also recognized the opportunity to address an issue that affected countless travelers of color every day. As he dressed, Andrew's phone chimed with an incoming call from Robert Greene. He answered, apologizing immediately for missing their scheduled meeting. Greene brushed it off. "I'm just glad you're alive and well. Let's meet for lunch at my office in Century City. I want to hear everything." Andrew agreed. After freshening up, he took a car service to Green Media's headquarters, a sleek skyscraper overshadowing much of the city. He was escorted to the top floor, where Robert Greene waited in a spacious boardroom, flanked by a couple of his executives. "Andrew, good to see you," Greene said, offering a firm handshake. He was a silver-haired man in his 60s, with a reputation for both shrewd business deals and philanthropic endeavors. "I've heard the basic outline of your ordeal. Care to fill us in?" Andrew recounted the entire story, from Captain Barnes's first suspicious glances to the final chaos in Denver. As he spoke, Greene's features hardened in anger. When Andrew finished, Greene shook his head. "That's outrageous. I hope Westland Airways takes the proper steps." An executive chimed in. "They're likely to issue a public apology, especially if this gains traction." Andrew nodded. "I've already given a preliminary statement to their aviation investigator. My main concern is ensuring that no other passenger experiences such blatant discrimination." Greene leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "We live in an age where a single incident like this can spark nationwide conversation. Andrew, I admire your composure through all of this. And I think we need to use this moment to highlight the mission behind Beacon of Tomorrow: equal opportunities, fairness, accountability. This pilot singled you out because of biases rooted in ignorance and fear." Andrew listened carefully, suspecting Greene was angling toward a bigger media play. Greene continued, "If you're open to it, I'd like to help you stage a press conference. Not to sensationalize what happened, but to call attention to everyday discrimination that people of color face, even in so-called luxury environments." Andrew hesitated, considering the potential repercussions. "I appreciate the support. I do think it's crucial to speak out. If we keep silent, people might dismiss this as an isolated incident instead of the systemic problem it really is." Greene nodded firmly. "Exactly. Let's hold a press conference tomorrow morning. I'll arrange the venue and invite major news outlets. You can share your story, and if Westland Airways wants to weigh in, they'll have the platform too." Andrew agreed. Thus, in addition to finalizing the business deal with Green Media, he found himself preparing for a public reckoning. He spent the rest of the afternoon discussing Beacon of Tomorrow's partnership with Green's executives, setting the foundation for a new initiative that would reach millions through media campaigns and philanthropic grants. By evening, Andrew was back in his hotel room, finalizing notes for the press conference. His phone buzzed with a text from Lucy. "Captain Barnes is suspended without pay, pending investigation." "I just wanted you to know. Hope you're safe in La." Andrew replied with a simple, "Thank you for the update. Wishing you the best." Then he set his phone aside, exhaled, and hoped that justice would follow swiftly. Morning came, and with it, a sense of anticipation. The press conference was held at a large auditorium in downtown Los Angeles. Cameras from major networks lined the back of the room. Print journalists filled the rows of chairs. At the front, a small panel table was set up, featuring Andrew, Robert Greene, and two representatives from civil rights organizations who had offered their support upon hearing Andrew's story. Greene kicked things off with an introductory statement, praising Andrew's resilience and reiterating that discrimination, in any form, should not be tolerated. Then Andrew took the podium, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "Yesterday, I experienced firsthand how prejudice can rear its ugly head in the most unexpected of places. I was singled out by my pilot, Captain Ronald Barnes of Westland Airways, and treated like a security threat simply for sitting in a seat I had every right to occupy." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Cameras flashed and the audience leaned in. Today, he continued, I stand before you not just on my own behalf, but on behalf of countless individuals who face microaggressions, blatant discrimination, and racial profiling in their daily lives. These incidents are not isolated. They are part of a larger, systemic problem that we must confront. He went on to describe Beacon of Tomorrow, highlighting how the organization empowered minority entrepreneurs. He underscored the importance of creating inclusive spaces in every facet of life, from boardrooms to airplane cabins. Then, with a measured calm that belied the rage still simmering inside him, Andrew offered something unexpected: empathy and education. I'm calling for accountability for Captain Barnes. Yes, he said firmly, but I'm also calling for comprehensive diversity and inclusivity training within airlines, perhaps an entire industry initiative. If we truly believe in the value of human dignity, we can't allow ignorance to dictate actions and put lives at risk. We must educate and transform hearts, not just punish wrongdoing. The auditorium was silent, reporters poised, the air thick with emotion. Andrew could almost feel the collective intake of breath as his words sank in. A reporter in the front row stood, voice wavering with emotion. Mr. Thompson, what do you say to those who argue this was just one bad actor, one pilot having a bad day? Andrew looked straight at the reporter, unflinching. I say that a bad day doesn't justify discrimination. It doesn't justify threatening to remove a passenger or divert a plane because of personal biases. But more importantly, I say, let's not merely label him our bad actor and move on. Let's address the culture that allows prejudice to fester. That's the only way we create lasting change. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Andrew fielded more questions about his experience, about Westland Airways' response, and about the broader social context. He learned that Captain Barnes had refused to attend the conference or make a public statement, though Westland Airways had released a formal apology and vowed to cooperate fully with any investigations by the FAA and civil rights commissions. By the time Andrew stepped down from the podium, sweat beaded on his forehead and his hands trembled slightly, but the applause that erupted told him he had struck a chord. People weren't just hearing the story of an aggrieved passenger. They were hearing a call to recognize and dismantle the very structures that perpetuate inequality. Afterward, in a smaller press room, local stations asked Andrew more personal questions. One anchor, tears in her eyes, said her own father had been denied service in segregated airports decades ago. Thank you, she said, for refusing to stay silent. Andrew offered a modest smile. It's all our responsibility to speak up. He didn't know it then, but video clips from the conference went viral. Social media lit up with hashtags like #FlyingWhileBlack and #InclusiveSkies, amplifying his message far beyond the walls of the auditorium. Beacon of Tomorrow's website saw a surge in traffic. Hundreds of new volunteers and donors reached out, eager to join the fight for equality. In the days that followed, Westland Airways formally terminated Captain Barnes's contract after concluding their internal investigation. The FAA suspended his pilot's license pending a psychiatric and ethics review, citing reckless endangerment of passenger safety and potential racial discrimination. The uproar among airline professionals was intense. Some sided with Barnes, arguing there might be more to the story, but the overwhelming majority condemned his actions. Pilots and flight attendants took to online forums to debate the need for better training and policies to address implicit bias in aviation. Meanwhile, Andrew continued his work in Los Angeles. He finalized the deal with Robert Greene, securing a major investment for Beacon of Tomorrow to produce a documentary series about underrepresented entrepreneurs. The synergy between his personal experience and the broader mission of uplifting marginalized voices felt like fate aligning. Amid all this, Andrew still grappled with a swirl of emotions, relief that justice was served, sorrow that racism persisted in such blatant forms, and a renewed determination to push for systemic change. As the media storm gradually subsided, Andrew reflected on how a single flight, a single act of discrimination, had catalyzed a national conversation, and he vowed to keep that conversation alive. Life has an uncanny way of thrusting us into defining moments. For Andrew Thompson, it happened at 30,000 feet, where a pilot's prejudice became the catalyst for change no one saw coming. His calm refusal to surrender to discrimination turned a harrowing flight into a powerful stand against systemic racism. As news outlets plastered his story across the country, his message resonated far and wide. True progress means rooting out prejudice wherever it hides, even in the most unexpected corners of our lives. And now we turn to you. If this story struck a chord, if you believe in speaking out against injustice, in lifting each other up, in refusing to stay silent, then join us. Like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to our channel. Your voice matters. Together, we can continue this conversation and be the change our world so desperately needs.